Yes.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. The next witness is John Watson.
Good afternoon, Mr. Watson. Thank you for coming. I'm just going to ask you if you would take the affirmation. Is that all right?
Yes, okay.
Fine. Do you solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence that you will give today will be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth?
It is. It
Thank
will
you.
be. Yes,
Pardon?
it is.
It is. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, Mr. Watson. Before we begin and turn to covering the matters you've covered in your statement, I understand you wanted to start by saying something.
Yes, I would like an affirmation to be made to the two men we heard this morning, Tyrone and
And Rangi.
And
Rangi.
yeah. Tyrone and Rangi, two youngsters I knew very well. And I'd just like to pay tribute to them today for what they said and their strength and the way they presented themselves. I was really, really fixed by that. It was outstanding. Outstanding. And so they are strong young men. But, of course, we all know the vulnerabilities that they've been through. And to be able to speak today and hear them was just outstanding.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Watson, on to more practical matters. Just to confirm that you have before you the statement you prepared for the Commission dated 15 January 2021.
That is correct, yes.
Mr. Watson, you are a registered clinical psychologist, is that correct?
That is right.
And as part of that profession, you are a life member of the New Zealand Psychological Society, a member of the New Zealand College of Clinical Psychologists, the Australian and New Zealand Association of Psychiatry, Psychology and the Law, and the International Society for the Prevention of Child Abuse and Neglect. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And in the course of your career, you have given expert evidence at the Family, Youth, District and High Courts of New Zealand. Is that correct?
I have, yep.
And as part of that role, completed over 3,000 specialist psychological examinations and assessments.
Yes, I have.
I want to turn to your time at Holdsworth. You were employed at Holdsworth from late 1972, is that correct, as a housemaster?
That's right.
And that role continued until the middle of 1975?
Yes, when I became principal of the Social Welfare Girls' Home in Palmerston North.
And can you explain for us what the role of a housemaster is?
Well, as I saw it, it was the job was caring for young children in the care of social welfare. One of the important things was that Holdsworth had children aged about 10 to 14, so they were basically youngsters at the time and had been placed in social welfare care due to problems in their homes for various reasons. And essentially they were very vulnerable and quite disturbed children. There's no doubt about that. They were in need of care and protection when they arrived at Holdsworth.
And Holdsworth at that time housed up to 60 children, is that?
Yes, it was.
Correct.
Yep. Yes, Holdsworth School, yep, as it was named. Yep.
And at the time that you arrived in Holdsworth, who was the principal at that stage?
Merritt Poviosa.
You're the first person I've heard say that name. So could you say it again so we can all learn it?
Marek, M-A-R-E-K.
Yes.
Povieza, P-O-W-I-E-R-Z-A.
Pov, it's a V in there. Yes, it's pronounced V.
It's pronounced as Povieza, but it's P-O-W-I-E-R-Z-A.
Thank you very much.
And so
He was the principal.
he was the principal, and who was the assistant principal at
was
that time?
Jack Drake.
Now, at some point, I'm not going to say his name correctly, Povieza,
Marek Povieza.
he moved on to another
Yes,
residence.
Yes, he took up, moved to Weymouth Girls' Home up in Auckland from Wanganui.
And what changes to the leadership roles occurred at that stage?
Well, Jack Drake became the acting principal and Duncan MacDonald became the deputy principal. And then following on from that, Mike Doolan became the principal towards the end, I think it was about end in 1973.
Now, while you were working at Holdsworth, you were also studying psychology at Massey University.
Yes, I was, yeah.
And as a result of that study, did you implement a particular program at Holdsworth?
Yes, it was like a token economy program that I was doing as part of my research and study at Massey, as well as working at the school.
And how did that program work in its
It's where
essence?
boys had like bus ticket things where they got credits for a good behaviour, and it's like a reward system. And as a result, because a lot of the boys had big behaviour problems, so obviously being able to institute something where they got some rewards for being good, often they were more often than not behaving rather badly. So as a result, the system helped some of them to be able to achieve a good standard of behaviour.
And in the program, as you devised it, what would happen if they didn't behave well?
Well, they got credits and they could get debits. Yes, credits for good behaviour, debits for bad behaviour. But we tried to soften that really so that it wasn't so punitive or anything. It wasn't meant to be punitive. They got credit where credit's due sort of thing. Yeah.
At some point in time, you became aware that boys were being sent to Lake Alice Child and Adolescent Unit.
Yes, I did become aware of that.
How did you understand that process to work?
Well, the understanding was that they were seriously disturbed young children, and the whole idea of sending them to Holdsworth School, sending them from Holdsworth School to Lake Alice, was that they should get specialist treatment there and medication to help them to be able to manage their own behaviour, because they had real difficulties in behaviour.
I think, and I'm turning now to paragraph 16 onwards of your statement, Mr. Watson. Did you understand that that relationship was established by the acting principal, Jack Drake?
Yes, it was.
And I think you note at paragraph 17 that of all the staff members, he was the one to refer.
Yeah, he referred most of the boys to Lake Alice. They would be sent there for persistent absconding and aggressive behaviour around the school. And I think at that time I was concerned at the reasons for the referrals to Lake Alice, because it seemed to me to be, I believe, a misbehaviour of this sort could be managed by the school rather than being sent to Lake Alice. I didn't think it was necessary to send them to a psychiatric hospital at the time, and I told Jack Drake about that.
And what was his response to you raising that with him?
He never acted on my concerns that I voiced then at the time.
So you mentioned before that there was a referral process, and that some of the children you thought were being sent in terms of perhaps medication.
Yeah, one would that was my assumption, that they'd probably some medication could help to control their behaviour, and Lake Alice was a psychiatric hospital, and I assumed that would be the outcome that would happen.
But at some stage you realised that the referrals were for, as you noted, persistent misbehaviour.
Yeah, they focused on, Jack Drake did seem to focus on the misbehaviour of the children, so maybe Lake Alice would be the place to send them.
And I think if we look at the bottom part of paragraph 17, you considered that was an abuse of the behavioural management system that you had introduced to the school.
Yes, I wanted it to be done in a humane way and handled at the school, not to be sent to Lake Alice.
So that wasn't part, obviously, of your behaviour management program?
No, not at all.
Do you remember, and I think you cover this at 18 and 19, how the children would get to Lake Alice?
Sorry?
Do you recall how the children would get to Lake Alice? How were they transported there?
Either taken down to Lake Alice by the car we had there, and sometimes in a van. We got a van later on. We were running around in a little green Hillman Hunter or something, I think it was, and a van was used to transport them. And usually Jack Drake or Duncan MacDonald would take the boys down to Lake Alice.
At paragraph 20, you talk about the referral forms. Did you see a form that was completed?
No,
When a child
they were done by Jack Drake as the acting principal. And I don't know whether they were written consent forms, because one would normally have assumed that you'd have to get the parents' permission, although the children were state wards, so they were the responsibility of social welfare.
But I think you note in that paragraph that you had been learning about informed consent at the time during your studies.
Yes, of course I was, yeah. And well, the standard ethical procedure was if a treatment was a child, informed consent of the parents was required before they could receive medical treatment. However, the boys were state wards under the care of DSW, and I believe that Jack Drake and Selwyn Leeks got around this requirement because the children had been removed from their parents. There was something going on there that I just thought was not right.
We touched briefly on your role as housemaster, but in terms of the authority within Holdsworth, what position did a housemaster have?
Well, that we were in for the day-to-day care of the children, and we also involved in sporting activities with them, taking them swimming and all that sort of thing. We did all the general things that you do. They went to school as well, had classrooms at the school, so they had schooling and they had recreation, a lot of recreation things done with them, and also at times counselling. By some of the other housemasters, as we had allocated a number of boys to our caseload. So our arrangement was that we would work with these children and help them along, to settle them down, spend some time with them, listen to their concerns, all the sort of thing like a parent and like as a parent would do, sit and listen to the children and advise them.
Yesterday, Mr. Watson, we heard evidence from a former youth aid officer, Mr. Sutherland, and he spoke of visiting Holdsworth on a couple of occasions. He described the environment there as prison-like. Do you have any insight on how that perception?
I would certainly not consider it as a prison at all. There was a behavioural regime there, yes, but it was hardly prison-like. The only thing that Jack Drake had invented was the dog box, where boys had been playing up badly. They were put in one place to be kept and watched, and it was just white lines on the ground, painted on the ground. I objected to the title as well. These were children, not dogs in a dog box. Yep.
So you raised your concerns in relation to that
I did.
with
Yes.
Mr. Drake?
Yeah. I think I was seen as a bit of a stirrer about that, but part of that was going back to the Children, Young Person and Their Families Act, the paramountcy principle prevailed, and that paramountcy principle was that the best interest of the child is the paramount consideration. And sometimes I don't think that was kept to and adhered to as it should have been.
Are you commenting on in respect of Holdsworth School?
Yes. Because that was the legislation we were working under as well, and that needed to be respected. And I think some of the things that actually happened there and procedures that were used wasn't, in my view, true to what this Act actually stated very clearly.
Did you raise your views on the Act with Mr. Drake or
Yes, I did.
And how were they received?
He wasn't, or he just saw it as I was doing a bit of stirring. But I think that's basically how he treated me. I was a bit of a stirrer. But I was a bit of a stickler too for keeping and doing things the best possible way.
May I ask a question? Ms. Finlayson Davis?
Yes,
Yes.
of course.
You're a young man and a student of psychology, and you were obviously taking your role very seriously.
Absolutely.
And within, as you saw it, the law as it was at the time. And you've said that you don't believe that the principle of the paramountcy of the welfare of the child was being adhered to. Is that right? That's what your evidence is?
Yeah, that was my concern.
Yes. I'm just wondering, you've talked to us about the dog box. I'm just wondering, have you got any other examples of the sorts of things that gave you concern that meant you raised it with Mr. Drake?
Oh, well, that was one major issue that I took. You do not treat a child like a dog.
Yes.
You don't even, and to me that was totally wrong. And I guess part of it is because I was attending university and going there twice a week to lectures, and was an extramural in those days. And I guess I think I was seen at times as being a bit of a stirrer, yes.
Yes, I just wondered, are there other examples of practices which you felt didn't keep the children to the fore?
I just can't think of any just right now offhand, but part of it was just making sure that the children were treated with dignity and respect. That was my concern.
Yes. And did you think they were being treated with dignity and respect?
Not when they were put in what they called the dog box, no.
So it comes back to the dog box?
Yeah, too right it did.
Yes,
Yeah.
and does that happen very often?
Yes, it was. It was used as a punishment, really, for children who were acting out. And, OK, it wasn't a locked cell or anything like that, like you get into prison, or in boys' homes as it was in those days too. But to me, it was just degrading
Yes.
to the child. Yeah, it was.
Thank you.
You've spoken about the different issues that you raised with Mr. Drake. I'm interested in the position of housemaster. Did you have any authority to raise concerns higher up the department?
Well, he was the acting principal at the time, but I didn't. So I had to accept that. Basically, I did accept that.
You note at paragraph 22 that complaints had to be in writing.
Yes,
And they would have to go through Mr Drake as acting principal.
yeah, yeah, and that's therein lies a problem, because they had to go through him first as acting principal, and I did not really have a lot of faith that it would be taken seriously and sent up to the director's level and head office.
I want to move on to a visit you made to Lake Alice, and this starts at paragraph 23 of your statement, Mr Watson. You talk about getting more worried about what was happening at Lake Alice,
Yep.
and so one day you visited the unit. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, because they were getting, well, the children told me that they were getting electric shocks to their legs, and that this is in the form of punishment by Dr. Leeks. The boys also said that they were given paraldehyde injections. I knew what paraldehyde was because I'd actually previously worked at Tokanui Hospital, and earning money to go back to university. And the boys said they got painful injections in their bottoms, which meant they couldn't sit down, because paraldehyde is a very powerful drug, and it's very and it's a very painful one as well. And then they were also had been given ECT to their heads and their legs without the normal use of ECT. Is always given, as I saw at Tokanui, a muscle relaxant first before you do anything else, before there's any things of electric shocks, because the body can convulse. So when I heard of the electric shocks as a form of punishment, was totally and utterly out of order. And they said they'd been given these painful injections, and I knew from my experience at Tokanui Hospital that it was paraldehyde, yeah. And because they had all the pain in their bottoms when they got it.
And I think at paragraph 23 you say this conversation happened with the two witnesses we heard from this morning.
Yes.
Rangi and Tyrone.
That's exactly right. In fact, I spoke to them just after their session this morning.
And you state at that paragraph that they appeared to you to be really scared when they were talking to you.
Beg your pardon?
You say in that paragraph they appeared to be really scared.
Yes, they were. Yeah, going down there and seeing the youngsters there, to me, this wasn't being done the right way, and I can understand them being scared about what was going on. Rangi said as much this morning too, didn't he? Earlier on.
Yes.
Yeah.
If I can ask you, Mr. Watson, to read out paragraph 25.
Yeah. I believe what the kids were telling me. I knew them well, and when they were telling lies, they would have made up some stories like that to tell me. It seemed to me that when the boys said Dr. Leeks was doing to them was completely out of order. After I spoke with the boys, I approached Selwyn Leeks about the boys' allegations. He was defensive, denied that the ECT had been given as punishment, and said the boys were lying. His response was along the lines of, I know what I'm doing, I'm the psychiatrist here, you're just a psychologist in training, which was a bit of a put down, to say the least. Yeah. But that was that, to me it was the height of arrogance, basically, of his behaviour.
And moving on to paragraph 26, on that occasion you went back to Holdsworth?
Yep. And I spoke to Jack Drake then about my concerns for the boys' safety at Lake Alice, yes.
And if you could continue reading that paragraph, Mr. Watson.
Yeah. told him that because he was the main person sending the boys to Lake Alice, he should have been monitoring their well-being while they were in the hospital. And Jack Drake tried to stop me from removing the boys from Lake Alice and told me that Dr. Selwyn Leeks was the only one who could make decisions to discharge patients. Because my concern was they would be, in my view, they were being ill-treated and should have been removed. But what I did, I decided no. Yeah, well, I think I did say that. So a couple of days later, I collected the boys from Lake Alice myself. I was that concerned about their safety.
Now, another issue you were dealing with at Holdsworth was a complaint made to you about sexual abuse suffered by the boys at Holdsworth.
Yes.
And that occurred sometime shortly after the Lake Alice
It did, yes.
concerns that we've just been speaking about. And what did you do? Well, first of all, who were those, who was being spoken about in terms of this sexual offending?
Well, what actually happened, the boys said that both men would sit with them on their beds to read bedtime stories. Now, some of these were young children, and often with young children, they appreciated someone just before lights out that they have a nice story read to them, and so they could have a quiet, peaceful night. But the boys said to me that they were reading stories to them and putting their hands down their pyjama pants and feeling them up. And I believe the boys also complained to other Holdsworth house buses, that was Graham Lee and Noel Bowker too, were also aware of it.
And I think you note at paragraph 30 that you had your own concerns prior to the boys talking to you about the behaviour of Mr. MacDonald and Mr. Drake. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah.
You spoke to Mr. Drake and Mr. MacDonald about what the complaint that had been made to you?
Yes.
And what was their response?
Well, they gave me no response, and I told them I was going to hand the matter over to the police to be investigated, because to me here were the children complaining about being sexually molested, whilst they've been read stories, and I contacted the police and asked them to investigate it.
And to your knowledge, did the police investigate it?
Yes, I think they did. I'm just trying to remember back then. Because I know two other housemasters told me that they had similar concerns, as they had also heard the boys making similar allegations against Jack Drake and Duncan MacDonald. Now, I said I intended to take over as principal, and they agreed with me. And I called the Wanganui Police to inform them of the sexual abuse allegations against Jack Drake and Duncan MacDonald. I told the police I wanted the men removed. I wasn't at the school when the police arrived, but I believe they came and escorted both men off the Holdsworth grounds. I didn't have any further contact with the police. I'm unaware of the follow-up or action by the police on this complaint. They didn't. My major concern was to get both men away from the children, and that was what was achieved.
You also raised your concerns with the head office of Department of Social Welfare.
Yeah, with the Director of Residences. I rang him the next day to tell him what I'd done and how I acted unilaterally, really. But I remember one comment he made. He said, "But you don't have the delegated authority to do that." I said, "Well, I've done it because I'm concerned about the staff abusing children."
And did the director come down or come up to Holdsworth and meet with you the next day?
Yes, he did.
Can you tell us about that meeting?
Well, he came over. He didn't meet me at the school, he came over to the house, the schoolhouse I was living in, and came over for lunch with my wife and him, because and he was, and I told him about the allegations about both the men as well as the complaints and the mistreatment at Lake Alice. Told him the whole story that had been going on, and he was surprised and told me he didn't think, I had the authority to take over the school. I said I was acting in the best interest of the children, and that was my paramount consideration. That was what the Children and Young Persons Act required. And it didn't matter to me whose toes I stepped on. After I explained this, the director said, thanked me for moving so quickly and shared my concern for the boys and told me he would, and that's when he came up, when he was there, when he came up. So, and I think he recorded that conversation too. He had a dictaphone on the table when we were having lunch together.
What was your expectation of what would happen with that complaint, having made it to
I thought
the
it would have
director?
been, things should have been happened, and it should have been sorted. But head office people work in different ways to people on the ground, and I don't remember the director speaking about the matter again. I informed him of everything, but whether he took it further, I really don't know.
But at some point, Mr. MacDonald was moved on from Holdsworth?
Yes, to a girls' institution in Auckland.
And Mr. Drake, do you recall what happened to him?
I'm not quite sure what happened to that, because it was at the time when I was moving myself as well. But MacDonald was set shortly to a role at a girls' school, Weymouth, and DSW did this knowing the allegations against him from Holdsworth, and I found this unacceptable as well.
Were you spoken to again by head office about either of these men?
No, well, the director advised me that no, he would handle the matter. Thank you, because he was the director, and it was left to him to take on. I couldn't overstep somebody from head office. But the main thing was I was still concerned about what was going on. Yeah.
At paragraph 39, you talk about the next principal to arrive, Michael Doolan,
Yes,
who we will hear from shortly.
yes.
But your recollection is he arrived towards the end of 1973?
I think it was towards the end of 73. And he took over as principal, and a really, really pleasant fellow. I remember he changed the culture that existed at Holdsworth, and I remember speaking to him about the Lake Alice problems and the other allegations. Like I brought him up to date with what had actually been going on. He said he heard I'd been making waves at Holdsworth School. Well, yes, I was. I believe the concerns I raised contributed to the decision not to send any more boys to Lake Alice. I think that was a very good move by Michael. Yep.
And in 1975, you left Holdsworth and took up a position of principal at another Department of Social Welfare home, that is the Palmerston North Girls' Home. Is that correct?
That's right. I became the principal there.
Now, at paragraph 41, we have asked you whether you were ever contacted in the years that followed when there was inquiries or investigations into Lake Alice.
Yes, I said it in my evidence there. I was not contacted in 1977 when allegations against Selwyn Leeks were rife and the Commission of Inquiry into his treatment at Lake Alice of a Lake Alice patient was taking place. I do remember hearing some of the news coverage in the investigation. I'm surprised that I wasn't contacted because I was still a DSW employee. It was a Department of Social Welfare Girls' Home I was then the principal of. I didn't consider coming forward because I had my hands full running the Palmerston North Girls' Home, and I'd already experienced more than enough controversy raising concerns about Lake Alice whilst at Holdsworth. I thought I'd pretty done my dash. I tried my best anyway.
In the intervening years, have you been contacted at any stage about Lake Alice or your concerns that you raised?
Oh yes, I had been contacted. Because there's another statement I made, was it before this one, I'd been contacted, and I think I've got the dates of it somewhere. But I had some, between now and then, I had been contacted again by the, these I think part of the Commission of Inquiry. Yep.
You haven't been spoken to by the police
No.
in the
No.
intervening years? I think if we turn now to paragraph 46, Mr. Watson.
Mm-hmm. Since 1973, by the police or any government officials about the complaints I've outlined in the statement. I can recall these events because what happened to the boys made me so angry. I only recently learned that despite my complaints to DSW about Lake Alice in 73, Dr. Selwyn Leeks continued in his role giving ECT to young people, including state wards, until 1977. And I was quite gobsmacked to hear that it has still been going on. I don't understand how that wasn't stopped earlier, because I'd certainly tried to bring it to an end.
Thank you, Mr. Watson. I have no further questions for you, but please remain there in case the commissioners do.
Thank you. I'm not sure if I can't.
Ms. Joy-Child.
If Miss Joy-Child, is she there? I can't. Oh, there she is. You're behind the. You don't have any. You don't. Thank you. All right.
Do you have any questions? I just have a few.
Yes, do.
Good afternoon, Mr. Watson. Here. Hi. Mr. Watson, you refer to the Children, Young Persons and Their Families Act and that they were state wards. Were you aware, were any social workers coming into Holdsworth to actually visit the young people? Well, they were children, actually.
Yeah, yes. No, they didn't have many social workers visiting there because there were residential social workers working there. Maybe that was why, but we didn't have the local social workers, say, from the DSW office in Wanganui. I can't recall anybody. I think one of the education department psychologists visited the school. I can remember that. But no, not others.
Would it have been your expectation that social workers, at the very least, would have come in?
Well, I would have expected that to happen, but sometimes one can expect things, but they don't always happen the way you'd like.
So there were a lot of things about Holdsworth that perhaps were making you anxious and feel quite frustrated.
Yeah, I guess I was I still am a very determined person. But I think part of it was, though, a real commitment to the safe care of children. And when I saw some of the things that were happening there, this was totally wrong in my view, and it did not follow the Act as it should. And as I said, I've lived my life doing that.
Yeah.
I still do that with my work at prisons. You know, always trying to work for the best interests of people. And I think sometimes that stuff has gone by the wayside, when in fact the focus should have been very clearly on the best interests of the children. And that's what I was hot about.
So appreciate that you were still a young psychologist in training, but you were a residential social worker and a housemaster, I think?
Yes.
So what, were there any supports in place for you? Like, was there a mentor? Was there someone outside of your immediate superior that you could talk to?
Oh, yes, yes, I had.
Yeah.
I had a great support of people from the university, Massey University, and from Waikato University as well, in setting up the behaviour management program. In fact, I think the Commission have got a copy of the report that I did to the New Zealand Psychological Society a number of years ago, and it was actually the first, I think it was the first piece of research that had been done in a social welfare institution, and setting up a behaviour management program. Yeah, it was.
And were you able to share your concerns, in particular around Lake Alice and the referral process, with your support network, with your mentors?
I raised them with my clinical supervisor at Massey University, but they didn't want to go dabbling into DSW politics. You know, they were there as lecturers, and I was the student attending their lectures. There seemed to be a bit of a division.
Yeah.
We're university people, thank you, and we don't want to go mixing
Yeah.
with others.
Okay, thank you. And when you picked up Tyrone and Rangi from Lake Alice, you just decided, and good on you, bugger this,
Yep.
you're going to go and pick them up.
Yep.
Was there any pushback from...
No, I just did it, and I took responsibility for doing it too. And said, I'm bringing the children back here. I believe they're in an unsafe place. I've made waves about all this anyway, and I acted on what I believed in. To me, I wanted these children out of the place because it was an unsafe place for them, and bringing them back to Holdsworth School was a far better option than leave them in pain and misery that we have already heard today.
That's
that happened there to those guys.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think I just want to... Yesterday we heard some quite clear evidence, and I know Ms Finlayson's already put this to you around. He was a young constable, youth aid officer, and he just described Holdsworth for exactly what he saw it through his own eyes, that it was like a prison system and there wasn't much learning going on in there.
Well, I think that was inaccurate in my view. We were really trying very hard there, and yes, there was a school there as well, and the housemasters particularly were very devoted people and worked jolly hard to do their very best by the children.
Okay. But he's entitled to his opinion. He's entitled to his opinion.
Oh yes, of
Yes,
course,
okay.
that's right. Depends on how long he was spending there. I mean, I was there from a number of years before I moved, yeah.
Thank you, Mr Watson. No further questions. Yeah.
Yep.
Just following on from that, it was Mr Sutherland, who was the police youth aid officer at the time, who gave evidence yesterday, and he was there. He was a youth aid officer in 1973. Do you recall him at all? He said he visited Holdsworth because he was in charge of filtering what to do with children who were brought to the police attention and trying to keep them away from the formal justice system. And in that capacity, he said he'd visit Holdsworth occasionally. Do you recall him at all?
No, I can't really recall, but I could accept that he was visited police aid because part of it is a preventative work that they were trying to do.
And exactly. He said he was coming out to try and
there you are.
get a good relationship with the children. That was part of his job.
Yeah,
but it doesn't matter if you don't remember. So that was my first thing. I have two or three questions for you, if you don't mind.
No.
The first one is, well, we've heard, of course, from Rangi and from Tyrone, both of whom are Māori. Do you have a sense of how many Māori boys were at Holdsworth? What percentage or what proportion?
I would say probably in those days it was probably about 40 to at least 40%.
Right.
Yeah, I'm just trying to switch head at the moment.
Yes.
Because at prison, there's 60% of the people I see at prison are Māori.
Yes. But a good 40%, you'd say,
a
at
good
Holdsworth?
40% at Holdsworth. Yeah.
So a significant number of children from Māori backgrounds.
Oh, yes.
So my question in relation to that is, was there anything provided, any encouragement for these boys to engage with their culture, anything of the tikanga Māori sort?
Yes,
at all?
Morven Simon did that. He was a wonderful man.
Sorry, his name was?
Morven Simon.
Morven Simon, yes.
He was the kamata of Kaiwhaiti Marae in Wanganui, and recently died. But Morven lived in Ackworth House on the other side of the property, and Morven Nakura, and he was a most wonderful person, and he worked really, really well with Māori children, very well.
So did he do that on an informal basis, or was it part of the program at the school?
Oh no, he was a housemaster there at one stage.
Oh, he was a housemaster.
Yeah,
Okay.
Morven Simon,
Yeah.
lovely
yeah.
fellow.
Okay. And do you recall what sort of things he did? Did he do it for all the Māori children there, or just the ones in his care?
Oh no, they put a big taniwha on the painted it on the bottom of the swimming pool as a way of keeping the children safe. You know, that's why you have a taniwha there. But rather tragically, his little boy, one of his little children, got through the gate one day and fell into the pool, and we found him. Yeah, I had a tangi for him.
That's very sad.
Yeah, so it was a.
So, but apart from what he did, so were there like language classes or kapahaka groups or anything like that?
Yeah, but I think Morven was working with the children, doing some of that work.
Doing some of that, okay. Right. Just returning to what you actually said today. You said that it was Drake who was doing these referrals to Lake Alice, and you said these words, something was not right. And I think in that context you were referring to the, I don't know what to call it, a relationship or arrangement or communications between Drake and Dr. Leeks. Do you want to elaborate on what you was meaning when you said something was not right?
Well, to me, he was the one responsible for doing the referrals.
Drake? Yes.
Drake to Selwyn Leeks at Lake Alice. And when I picked up what was actually going on there and how the children were being treated as punishment, that's when I saw I really objected to, and said that to me that the children were not being treated humanely, and I raised that concern with him.
Do you think there was an arrangement between Mr. Drake and Selwyn Leeks?
Well, no, I don't think there was. I'm not sure.
A sort of a referral arrangement?
Yeah. Yeah, there was a referral. Yeah, he was the one responsible for making the referrals to Lake Alice.
Yes.
That's when he was acting principal.
Right.
Yeah.
There's been a suggestion, and more than a suggestion, made, if you heard, I believe it was Tyrone Marks' evidence this morning, that he had been sexually abused by Mr. Drake when he was at an earlier school, and that, I don't know if did you hear Tyrone's evidence?
No, I
You
didn't
were
hear the first
at the
part.
back.
I was
Okay.
still on my way up here.
Right, well, his evidence was that he had been sexually abused by Mr. Drake at an earlier school.
At an
And-
earlier school?
Yes,
I wasn't
Yes.
aware of that. No.
that's his evidence, and that he believes that at least part of the reason for Mr. Drake referring him so often to Lake Alice was an attempt to perhaps get him to forget what had been going on before. Now, I don't know if you know anything about this at all, and I'm going to leave it to you to decide if you can comment in any way on that allegation.
Well, it's a surprise to me,
Mm-hmm.
that's for sure. But I didn't know there was that much of a connection. You've certainly enlightened me on that.
Yes.
But because he did the referrals to Lake Alice, you know.
Right.
And I'm not sure whether I could say they were in cahoots or anything, but he was the person responsible for doing the referrals.
Okay.
But I did not know that that something had happened with Tyrone earlier on.
That's right.
Yeah.
So I won't press you further on that because you didn't know about it, and it's really only speculation as far as you're concerned.
I'm not surprised.
You're not surprised?
No, I'm not surprised. There were wheels within wheels operating there, I think, and but I can understand that because Drake, as I said, was busy interfering with the children when they were reading
Yes.
stories to them.
Yes.
You know, and so something else of a similar ilk has come up, and to me that's not totally a surprise.
Yes. And then in relation to, and I'm not sure, I believe it was Mr. Sutherland, the police officer, who talked about the way, the marking system which you introduced, this, I forget what you called it, but it was a behavioural
The token
management.
economy,
The token,
yeah.
the
It was-
token
It's
system.
based on some of the work that had been done
That's
in the
right.
United States.
Mr. Sutherland was concerned, I think it was him, he was concerned when he asked somebody about that, about the people who got the Ds, because apparently if you got some Ds, you were more likely to be sent off to Lake Alice.
I don't really think that was the case,
You
but
don't think it was the case?
not that I can recall. No.
He had the feeling, he understood the token system, he knew what it was there, saw that it was an incentive, but he felt it might have been being manipulated in a way, so that if a child argued with a particular person or got offside with them, they could mark them down and then get them sent off to Lake Alice as sort of punishment for that.
Well, I can't recollect that's happening
Right,
as directly as that.
yes.
No.
Yes, but I'm only telling you, because here's an opportunity for us to find
I
out.
wasn't privy to all the information that went on.
No, I understand that. And Mr. Doolan, who's coming to give evidence soon, I was just looking at his brief of evidence, and he hasn't said it yet, but I thought I would put it there. He said, on taking up my appointment at Holdsworth, I became aware of general concerns about the Lake Alice Adolescent Unit from some Holdsworth members. Mostly, as I recall, about sending boys there being a waste of time, as the treatment made no observable improvements to their functioning and was thought to be harsh and was seen as counterproductive. Could that have been you that he's talking about there?
No, I agree that. Could you just repeat that again?
Yes, he said that he became aware of general concerns at Holdsworth about the referral of boys to Lake Alice.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
I'd certainly accept
That's
that.
right. And the way he's framed it here, and we can ask him when he comes, it seems that there was more than one person raising concerns about Holdsworth. Were you aware that other staff members were also concerned?
Oh, yes, I think some of the other housemasters were.
Right.
About the children going to Lake Alice in the first place.
Yes.
And I certainly was opposed to it as well.
Yes.
And having gone down to see the children and heard what they told me, and I'm pretty sure that they were not just telling me a story.
Yes.
These things were actually happening.
Right. And in fact, you weren't the lone voice because there were other people, other staff members who were also concerned. Is that right?
Yes,
Right.
there were.
Yes. Did they raise it in the same way that you did?
I think I was probably a bit more blunt blunt or more direct about
Yes.
it, because to me, again, it's going outside of not keeping to the spirit of the Act.
Yes, yes. And you've made that very plain. Thank you. And then just as a final matter, and you said right at the beginning of your evidence that these were very vulnerable children in need of care,
Yep.
and care and protection, that some of them were seriously disturbed.
Yes.
Standing back, and I appreciate you were part of it at that time and doing your best, but standing back, do you think that the children in the care at Holdsworth at that time were indeed getting care and protection that they deserved?
I think most of the time it would be the case. It was positive. But then there were other things happening there with the kids being sent to Lake Alice, and that was Jack Drake's organising, which I objected. When I went down there and found out what was happening,
Yes.
that's when I got pretty angry about it all.
Yes, so maybe on the surface it was looking all okay, but there were other things going on
Yes.
that were not.
Well, at Lake Alice, yes, definitely.
Yes, and the sexual
And the sexual
interference.
abuse of them too by Drake
Yes,
and McDonald. Yeah.
yes. I think that's it for me, as far as my questions. Anything arising from that? Yes, I wondered. Just talk into your microphone, please.
Mr. Watson, I'm just interested in what your perceptions were for why these boys were being sent there. How were they chosen, from your observation, to go to Lake Alice?
Well, part of that was by the judgment of Jack Drake at the time, that they were, playing up, misbehaving, and I assumed if you were going to send a child to a psychiatric unit, well, an adolescent unit was meant to be, and some of them were barely adolescents themselves, that was actually meant to be a positive treatment thing. Certainly was never mentioned. When I went down there and found out it was being used as a punishment thing, was totally and utterly wrong.
Right. So you thought it was people who, in Mr. Drake's mind, were misbehaving?
Yeah, well,
Boys.
He sort of selected the most acting out of children, and thought, oh well, he would decide to send them to Lake Alice
Right.
for treatment.
Right.
But they ended up with electric shock punishment. Yeah, but that's
From your observations, were they the most acting out children?
Some of them, yes, some of them were. A lot of youngsters, they did act out a lot. That was part of the reason why they were at Holdsworth School in the first place. But and sometimes they were difficult to manage. But this happens in all families. Bringing up my own children is the same thing. Yeah. The kids will act out and carry on. But this was an extreme case. These were extreme situations.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Watson, thank you very much for coming. Oh, was there anything else?
Oh, no, sorry.
No, yes, thank you very much for coming. I appreciate it's been a long time, but I think it's important that we've had the view not just of the children's experiences at the time, but of somebody who was trying to care for them well at that time. And so to that extent, your evidence has been extremely useful. So thank you very much for taking the time and no doubt the stress of coming along to do this.
To me, it was the most important thing to do.
We're very grateful to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.